President Trump just concluded his speech on terrorism in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, where he said the United States is prepared to stand with the Muslim world in pursuit of common interests, including fighting terrorism.
This is not a battle between different faiths, different sects, or different civilizations. This is a battle between barbaric criminals who seek to obliterate human life and decent people, all in the name of religion.
To discuss this speech and all the week's news, we turn now to our political panel. Ed O'Keefe is a CBS News contributor and covers politics for The Washington Post. David Ignatius is a columnist at The Washington Post. Molly Ball covers politics for The Atlantic. And Ramesh Ponnuru is senior editor of the National Review. David, I want to start with you. Just jump in on that, on the speech. What do you make of this trip?
The speech was the capstone. The president didn't say anything surprising, but the language was very different from the Trump we know of the campaign. He was really inviting partnership, not drawing sharp lines. The White House has worked very hard to prepare this trip, and for all of the questions about flip-flops and the difference between Trump then and Trump now, I think you need to stand back and look at the symbolic importance of this. A president who really did represent many Americans who were suspicious, angry at Saudi Arabia and the problems in the Middle East that it represented, are seeing their hero go to Saudi Arabia and embrace the Saudi leadership. Similarly, the Saudis have gathered Arab and Muslim countries who were very suspicious of the United States to Riyadh to meet and embrace this American president. Behind it is a shared antipathy toward Iran. That's important. But I think the Trump administration is also making a bet that the younger Saudi leadership, headed by the Deputy Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, that this is a change agent, ready to try to move into a different era for Saudi Arabia and the region. They're taking advantage of that, and I actually think that's smart.
Molly, as David points out, this is quite a distance from the president who not only campaigned on a Muslim ban, but then who also had very critical things to say about Saudi Arabia, about Hillary Clinton's relationship with Saudi Arabia, and who, on the question of radical Islam, called it radical Islamic terrorism. And if you didn't use that phrase, it was proof that you misunderstood the entire biggest, most important threat to America. Now he's in a different place.
And he is not, in fact, using those three words in the speech today. I think, as David said, a very important decision has been made by the administration about what kind of President Trump was going to be with regard to the Muslim world, and it is not candidate Trump at all. And I think it also follows on the sequence of national security decisions and appointments we've seen this administration make, which are much more on the sort of traditionally hawkish side of the Republican Party, rather than the more isolationist or transactional or sort of America First ideology that he espoused during the campaign. This is a rather conventional type of play for an American president to make, to say we are looking for areas of cooperation. We are not judging people on the basis of their religion. That was not candidate Trump at all.
Ramesh, give me your take. And also, this is happening in a larger context, which is a lot of confusion about which is the President Trump. Is it the one that Molly described, who has, on things from NATO to dealing with China, has, on the foreign policy front, really shaved off the rough edges of his campaign rhetoric, yet domestically, obviously, is having challenges. So where do you see this in the evolution of understanding the president?
I do think that this speech fits pretty easily in a mainstream foreign policy tradition. We've now had 3 presidents post 9/11 who have made a distinction between the people we are fighting against and the mainstream of Islam. I think what was new here was Trump himself speaking respectfully and admiringly about Muslims and Islam. That we haven't seen. The focus on the terminology, radical Islamic terrorism, versus the remarks that he actually talked about. He said Islamic terrorism, he said Islamicism. The prepared remarks called them Islamist terrorist groups. I do think that the focus on that has been somewhat overblown on the part of both parties, with one side saying, oh, if you use those words, you're going to offend all Muslims, another side saying, you've got to name the enemy in order to win. These terms all seem pretty much identical as far as I can tell.
Right. Although it's true that the president as a candidate said, unless the president Obama at the time used that expression, he should resign. So he was putting a lot of weight on it. The other thing he put weight on in this particular trip, Ed, was the idea that this deal with the Saudis would lead to, as the president said, hundreds of billions of dollars in investments into the United States and jobs, jobs, jobs. He may be overseas, but he's keeping the eye on the ball here at home.
He may be overseas and he may be overselling. In fact, if you look at the details of this, as we did in the Post today, you know, Lockheed Martin, for example, is selling them $28 billion worth of military equipment, and that'll boost 450 jobs at the Sikorsky plant in Connecticut. There's a $7 billion deal with GE for technology and training programs, but that's going to create 250 high-tech jobs in Saudi Arabia. Where we may see most of the investment come from is this deal being put together by the Blackstone investment firm. The ink isn't actually dry on it yet. They haven't finished the deal, and the negotiating of it began during the Obama years. But what they're looking to do is get about a $40 billion fund put together for infrastructure projects, a lot of which will be spent here in the States. So Saudi money may end up helping to build new projects in the States. If he can't get an infrastructure deal from here in Washington, he may get one thanks to Riyadh. Right. And that is the irony. But look, he brought about 50 corporate executives with him, with the hope that they would either finalize deals or put some new ones together. Looks like that's happening to some extent. And it's a demonstration of the kind of diplomacy that the administration thinks they can do. Economic diplomacy, which helps the countries they're visiting and obviously would have a benefit back here.
Right. Molly, let's switch back here. Did something turn this week in terms of the investigations and the challenges the president has on the Russia front?
It's almost hard for me to remember where this week began because every day has felt like a year, given the incredible pace of new developments, the explosion of all of these scandals. It's hard to believe that it was less than 2 weeks ago that Director Comey was fired. But so something turned in that things happened and really important things were learned, right? The appointment of the special prosecutor, a very important turn in the saga. But if you're talking about the sentiment of the Congress in particular, I spent most of my week talking to Republicans on Capitol Hill and their staffs and people around the Congress, and there was a feeling that this idea that some sort of dam broke and that they're now ready to really go after the president, that's a little bit overblown. They really do still, they're very nervous. When Anthony was talking about the nervous, Trump-curious voters out there in the country, that was very much the vibe I got from Capitol Hill Republicans. They really still want him to be something that he hasn't been so far. They are incredibly nervous by all of these things happening. There was actually a sense of relief at the appointment of the special prosecutor, because for a lot of Republicans in Congress, that took a load off of their shoulders, put it in somebody else's hands, and now they can all say, we trust him, we respect him, it's up to him, and whew, we don't have to do that.
Right. What did you make of this week, Ramesh?
Molly was saying that the last week it felt like a year, and I think specifically it felt like the 7th year of an administration, where often the Washington atmosphere is one where the White House is enveloped by scandal, and it's just sort of consumed by this kind of controversy. What's different, of course, is that this is not even the 7th month of this administration. It hasn't even fully staffed itself, and we've got this kind of atmosphere. But it's a weather pattern that's confined to D.C. I don't think that it is yet true that the country at large feels that way. And one of the things that's happening with congressional Republicans is, look, they've got this feeling in the pit of their stomach. They wish the president would act in different ways, but they are keenly aware that the vast majority of Republican voters across the country, including the voters in their districts, still supports this president. And you will see a pattern where the House Republicans who are in swing seats are more nervous, the senators who are in blue or purple states are more nervous, but the bulk of Republicans don't fit into either of those categories, and they're nervous, but they're still going to be supporting this president.
Ed, they're nervous, and what about the agenda? Are they nervous about that too? They're nervous about an unpredictable president, but what about the future in terms of getting stuff done?
I mean, it's important to reiterate what the Speaker said at one point, or actually twice this week, which was, you know, you may think Washington's consumed by scandal, but we are still doing the nation's business here. There were meetings among Republicans to get ready for health care with the CBO's estimates on that House bill expected this week. That allows the Senate to really get to work on health care for real now. They were starting to put together plans for tax reform, which of course is really the big item on the wish list for Republicans. But they do worry that the more of this that there is, the worse off they become. There were a few moments this week, I think, where Republicans, as much as they, and I agree with Ramesh, may not take this as a danger sign quite yet, all of them, where I think they realize they have to take it seriously, at least. John McCain, Richard Burr, among others, when asked in the immediacy of the aftermath of these stories coming out, confronted by reporters, and were a bit flippant about it at first. Once they went back to their offices and actually read the stories, they realized how serious it was and went to great lengths to make sure that people understood, they understood how serious it is. They'll be worrying about that while they're trying to get other things done.
David, your thoughts on the meeting between the president and the Russian foreign minister and ambassador. There were two parts of that meeting. One, the president's comments about James Comey, but then there was this question of whether classified intelligence was given to the Russians in the meeting. What do you make of that?
The president has the authority to declassify intelligence. That's one of the powers the president has, is to share sensitive information with foreign leaders. It's used often to good effect. I think we need to know more about that. The meeting just felt unseemly. The smirking figure of the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov in the White House, kind of dismissing reporters. What are you doing here? I mean, this is our country. But I thought more generally, John, this crazy week with the appointment of Robert Mueller as a special counsel, you could almost hear an exhale. Whew. You know, here comes somebody who, I haven't found anybody who says anything negative about Robert Mueller. He is an outstanding figure. He's respected. One thing we're going to have to deal with in our business, he doesn't leak. So he's going to conduct this investigation quietly. If there's something that was done wrong, he's going to find it out. If you're sitting in the White House, you have to recognize this is a serious prosecutor. So I think we're now in what my friend Steve Hadley likes to call regular order. Mm-hmm. We're in a more calm, stable period. Steve, former National Security Advisor, knows what it's like for things to be bumping around. Less of that maybe now.
Ramesh, I was struck by Sean Spicer's argument about James Comey in explaining what the president, pardon me, meant when he was talking to the Russians. He said that because of Comey's grandstanding and politicizing of the investigation into Russia, that made negotiations harder with Russia. What do you make of that?
Well, it seems like an admission against interest on the part of the president, one that would tend to confirm the darkest suspicions of his critics that he went after Comey because Comey was getting in the way of his attempt to curry favor with the Russians and was getting closer to finding things out that the president doesn't want to get out. That it doesn't necessarily mean that, because it's just hard to say, particularly with this president, what things mean. The other thing that's interesting about this administration has ping-ponged back and forth in its explanations of why it fired James Comey. It is absolutely within the president's authority to do it. Nobody doubts that. But they keep acting like guilty people in the way they can't settle on one simple explanation for it.
Right. All right. We're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you. And we'll be back in a moment with thoughts on presidents and the press.